It was the clarion call to a new way of doing news.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, up.
It's now 10 o'clock and time for the news from ITN.
British Airways and some unions join forces to fly the flag again. It'll be a white Easter holiday for some. Good evening. The management and unions of British Airways are linking together to help to get the airline flying again by next Tuesday, despite the engineers' dispute.
But now, at 10 o'clock, it's time to go over to London for News at 10.
Prime Minister sues the Mail and Express for libel. Liverpool are through to the Cup final. Good evening. The Prime Minister is suing two Fleet Street newspapers, the Daily Express and the Daily Mail, for libel.
This is Westwood Television, and the time, 10 o'clock.
Four Western leaders warn Russia over Berlin. Will the cricket circus clean bowl test matches? Good evening. The main Western leaders meeting in London have warned the Russians that East-West détente would be seriously threatened.
This is Thames from London. We now go over to Reginald Bosanquet and Sandy Gall at ITN.
Good evening. A select committee has made another strong attack on a minister. This time it's Mr. Dennis Howell.
This is Thames from London. The time is 10 o'clock. At ITN, Sandy Gall and Anna Ford.
Fireman, new offer to try and stop the strike. And why was this 18th century house bulldozed? Good evening. Firemen's leaders and their local authority employers are still locked in talks aimed at averting the one-day strikes due to start on Wednesday.
The BBC strike is over. They'll pay 16.5%. At London Airport, Christmas is fogged off. Good evening. The BBC's strike over pay is over.
Princess Anne has a baby girl. Both are well. Frank Whittle, father of the jet engine, pleads for concord. Good evening. Princess Anne tonight gave birth to a baby girl.
This is TVS. Now we join Selena Scott and Martin Lewis at ITN for national and international news. Time check, it's 10 o'clock.
The miners vote not to strike.
and launched today the new Channel 4. Good evening. The miners, as expected, have voted not to strike and to accept their pay offer against the advice of their president, Arthur Scargill.
This is Thames from London. In 30 minutes, our local bulletin. First, the national news at the studios of ITN. It's 10 o'clock.
60 dead in Lebanon as Arafat fights for his life. The bone marrow boy who may die because there's no money. Good evening. The PLO leader, Yasser Arafat, and his followers are tonight fighting for their lives in their last base near Tripoli in northern Lebanon.
Well, now we go over to the studios of ITN for the latest national and international news. It's read for us tonight by Alistair Burnett and Sandy Gall. The time, 10 o'clock.
Mr. Parkinson resigns. He says tonight he won't argue now. And Jacqueline's team are all square in the Ryder Cup. Good evening. Mrs. Thatcher accepted the resignation of her Trade and Industry Secretary early today.
11 Central News, but now the national news.
Murder in London, there could be 16 bodies. The arms the Argentines abandoned are worth £8 million. Good evening. The police in London are engaged in what could be Britain's biggest mass murder investigation involving up to 16 deaths.
And now it's time to go over to ITN for tonight's News at 10, a specially extended edition. It's 1 minute past 10.
Child who's had the ultrasound operation in Britain.
This is Thames from London. The time now, 10 o'clock.
Mrs. Thatcher's pound is at its lowest. 40 years on, a wreath for the bridge that was too far. Good evening. The pound closed tonight in London at its lowest ever since Mrs. Thatcher took office, and indeed ever since there was a pound and a dollar.
This is Thames from London. The time is 10 o'clock. At the studios of ITN, Alistair Burnett and Pamela Armstrong.
Is it Ovet's last exit? And snapshots of a duke with curious friends. Good evening. Steve Ovet's being kept in hospital in Los Angeles for at least another night after his collapse in the Olympic 800 meters.
The time now, 10 o'clock.
Court freezes the miners' millions, and McEnroe's cup runneth over. Good evening. Nearly £3 million belonging to the National Union of Miners has been traced to a bank in Dublin.
That follows next on TVS, the news from the studios of ITN.
The boxer says, "I'm no con man." The machine that can scan 1,000 prints a minute. Good evening. Terry Marsh, the British world light welterweight champion who has retired because of epilepsy, told ITN tonight that he never meant to con anyone.
North swears, "I assumed the President knew about Iran." And the Colonel meets the smallest soldier of the regiment. Good evening. Colonel Oliver North says he thought he had President Reagan's approval for sending money from arms sales to Iran to the Contra rebels in Nicaragua.
This is Thames from London.
The engineers and the TUC, it's a split. And now they've found her, will they raise her? Good evening. The Trades Union Congress heard tonight that it faces the biggest division in its history.
In 45 minutes at 10:45, Michael Parkinson tracks down the World Cup heroes, the boys of '66. First, ITN.
Gorbachev tells Mr. Reagan, "Our foreign ministers can't meet now." Mr. Steele loses the Liberal vote on nuclear weapons. And told to walk by Yorkshire, Geoffrey Boycott. Good evening. The Liberal Party rallied round itself tonight after its leader, Mr. David Steele, was on the losing side in a vote on nuclear defence policy.
Parliament will break recess to discuss the Gulf, and the Guinness Three move quickly to an open prison. Good evening. Parliament is being recalled next week to hold an emergency two-day debate on the crisis in the Gulf. Both the Commons and the Lords will meet.
This is Thames Television. The Thames News follows the World News now from ITN at 10.
Death ferry sails in tonight, passengers still smell sewage, and the children for whom crime has become the future. Good evening. The Celtic Pride ferry set sail again today, only 24 hours after 2 children died, apparently after breathing in sewage fumes.
But now the time is 10 o'clock, and it's time for the latest news from ITN.
.3% inflation, but interest rates stay put. And Prince Charles unveils his village of the future. Good evening. The annual rate of inflation has hit a 7-year high of 8.3%.
This is Anglia, and now we join ITN.
The IRA says it thought the army wife it murdered was a soldier. And a shock for Gower and Botham, they're out of the England squad. Good evening. The IRA say they murdered the wife of a British serviceman in West Germany last night. They say they thought she was a soldier.
Now in Granada we join Alistair Stewart and Trevor MacDonald at IDN for the news at 10.
Over Sarajevo Airport, more troops will keep it flying. And a match too far for Jeremy Bates, out in 5 sets. Good evening. Sarajevo Airport in Bosnia, besieged by Serb forces for almost 3 months, reopened tonight to flights carrying humanitarian aid.
This is Thames Television. The time is 10 o'clock.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
The Chancellor cuts interest rates in a modest mini-budget. And the Duchess of York tells us why she's keeping a low profile. Good evening. Another cut in interest rates and a squeeze on public sector pay.
The time now is 10 o'clock, and we join Trevor MacDonald at ITN for the latest world news.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
Clinton talks tough, Serbs offer a concession tonight. And how this computer disk can bring pornography into your home. Good evening. The Yugoslav government announced within the last few hours that it's cutting all aid to the Bosnian Serbs.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
Yeltsin tells his people we want no bloodshed. And Manchester calls on the big spender to help its Olympic bid. Good evening. The power struggle in Moscow seems to be going President Yeltsin's way so far.
In half an hour, news from around our region in London tonight. But now, it's 10 o'clock.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Julia Somerville.
America concedes we missed half the targets, and the press prepares for new laws on privacy. Good evening. The United States has conceded that half or more of the Iraqi missile batteries targeted by Allied warplanes yesterday weren't destroyed.
From London, you're watching Carlton. Now today's national and international news from ITN.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
The Lords defeat the government again over rail privatization. And in disgrace and out of Europe, United fans arrested in Turkey. Good evening. The government's desperately trying tonight to get its rail privatization bill back on track after it was ambushed in the Lords.
Tomorrow on Central at 8:30.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
A bar owner's grief, a province in despair. And Agassi's back, but where's the fun in tennis today? Good evening. The misery of mindless killing in Northern Ireland was etched on the face of a Loughlin Island bar owner today. Hugh O'Toole returned to his bar and broke down when he was shown where 6 of his regulars had been shot dead.
Now on Central, it's news time.
From the headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor MacDonald.
South African election breakthrough, the Inkatha boycott is over. And how this bird landed its owner in court. Good evening. The long shadow over South Africa's first multiracial elections, the one cast by a violent Zulu boycott, was lifted today at the 11th hour.
Now the national and international news from ITN tonight with John Suchet. It's 10 o'clock.
headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with John Suchet.
Trade improves, but unsold Nissans tell another story. And making better doctors, new guidelines for medical students. Good evening. Britain's trade gap took an unexpected turn for the better last month.
Now on Central, it's a little after 10 o'clock. Time for the news from ITN.
From ITN, News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
Gas chief says, I'm worth £1,000 a day. And the crowded holiday jet that could only turn right. Good evening. The British Gas Chief Executive Cedric Brown appeared before a committee of MPs today to defend his salary of £475,000 a year.
This is Granada with the news now from ITN.
From ITN, News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
Lottery under investigation, the jackpot dream turns sour. And what's the price for a slice of Britain's heritage? Good evening. Camelot, the company which runs the National Lottery, is being investigated tonight about whether it did enough to protect the identity of its first multi-million-pound winner.
From ITN, News at 10, with Julia Somerville.
Aitken defiant as Sleaze claims intensify, and how you stand to lose pounds from your pocket. Good evening. The government reacted furiously today to more allegations of sleaze against another minister.
It's 5 minutes past 10. This is Central. It's time for the news from ITN.
News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
Terrorism rocks Middle America. At least 19 die in Oklahoma. And how a British guerrilla is beating the Japanese at their own game. Good evening. A terrorist bomb in a government office block shattered Oklahoma City in America today and stunned the country.
Apologies for the sound on that one there. We've got more movies coming up at 11:35 tonight. Now in Yorkshire at the time, 10 o'clock.
ITN, News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
Minister insists he knew nothing of a legal arms deal. And the East End says goodbye to Ronnie Cray. Good evening. The Treasury Minister Jonathan Aitken was forced to defend himself today, not once, but twice, against allegations that he knew that a company of which he was a director was illegally selling arms to Iran.
This is Carlton from London, your weekday ITV. Now, tonight's news at 10.
From ITN, News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
One last push and the campaigning finally ends. And the goal that lifted England's World Cup hopes. Good evening. It's all over tonight, bar the voting.
Tonight's late West Country news with Alison Johns follows in 30 minutes.
From ITN, News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
Molem's winning gamble, loyalist prisoners back the talks. and why, despite the storms, spring's blooming earlier than ever. Good evening. Mo Molam's gamble of going to the maze to talk directly to loyalist prisoners to try to save the peace process looks as if it's paid off.
You're watching Carlton, where now it's over to ITN.
From Edinburgh and London, news at 10 with Trevor MacDonald and Julia Somerville.
The voters decide on Scotland's day of destiny. And a hefty cut coming for the household gas bill. Good evening from Edinburgh, where the polls have just closed in the referendum which would radically change the way Scotland is run.
For over 31 years now, our colleagues at ITN have brought us Big Ben's famous chimes, and now it's my duty to announce the final News at 10.
From ITN, News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Clinton breaks his long silence about Monica Lewinsky, turning back the clock to bid farewell to News at 10. Good evening. President Bill Clinton broke his long public silence about Monica Lewinsky tonight to say he wished her well.
On the ITV Nightly News, Prince Charles's comments on the Falklands cause a storm in Argentina. Plus news of tonight's football. Burning anger in Argentina over the Prince's Falklands comments. All the Premiership action. How Leeds close the gap on the leaders.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. There was a storm of protest in Argentina today about what the Prince of Wales said there about the Falklands. On the ITV Nightly News, the latest reaction to the acquittal of Private Lee Clegg. Plus Hollywood's first couple fly in.
There's another chance to catch the first episode of Wonderful You at 11:35. Now, though, it's news time.
Anger as Private Clegg is cleared of murder. And Hollywood's first couple fly in to pay tribute to a movie genius.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. The paratrooper Lee Clegg was finally cleared of the murder of the Belfast teenager Karen Riley at his retrial in Belfast today.
This is Carlton, part of the ITV network.
Violence flares as loyalists admit killing leading Ulster lawyer. And Lennox Lewis looks ahead to the rematch with Holyfield.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Murnaghan.
Good evening. A renegade loyalist group, the Red Hand Defenders, said tonight they murdered a leading human rights lawyer in a bomb attack harking back to some of Northern Ireland's darkest days.
Coming up, Mohammed Fayed pays huge damages to the widow of a business rival, plus a big night for Leeds and Arsenal in Europe. Join us.
In half an hour, a special edition of Videotech reviews this year's Brit Awards, and that's here on Carlton.
Fayed ordered to pay huge damages to old rival's widow. And a good night for Leeds and Arsenal in the UEFA Cup.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Nicholas Owen.
Good evening. The Harrods owner, Mohammed Al Fayed, today agreed to pay more than £1.5 million to the widow of his old business rival, Tiny Rowland.
After the break, calls for tighter gun controls tonight after the horror of the Texas church massacre. Join me after the break.
We've a profile of the Sheffield band Def Leppard in half an hour. Now it's news time. First with ITN.
Texas church massacre, new calls for gun controls. And a return to form at last for Newcastle tonight in Europe.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monahan.
Good evening. The American Attorney General Janet Reno said tonight that Americans had to look hard at the gun control issue after the 6th mass shooting since April.
This is Carlton, part of the ITV network.
Jill Dando shot dead. Was it an underworld killing? Bradford and Bingley members vote to take the money.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monahan.
Good evening. The TV personality Jill Dando, who as Crime Watch presenter helped to send dozens of criminals to jail, was murdered on her own doorstep today.
This is Carlton. Time now for the ITV Nightly News.
New rules to stop big supermarkets acting unfairly. And TV viewers once more vote Barrymore their favourite.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Nicholas Owen.
Good evening. The biggest investigation into Britain's major supermarkets concluded today that in some important areas they're acting unfairly.
This is Carlton, your weekday ITV.
Family and nation in Thanksgiving for Queen Mother. An upwardly mobile space station rocket launches tonight.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monahan.
Good evening. Celebration of the Queen Mother's first 100 years gathered momentum today with a national service of Thanksgiving in St Paul's Cathedral.
This is Carlton with the news.
Farmers' fury as the mass slaughter begins. And Liverpool continue the English triumph in Europe.
From ITN, the ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. A ruthless new slaughter policy. Extraordinary test tube couples spark an international row. And Africa enjoys its own spectacular eclipse.
From ITN, the ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. A French woman in her 60s has provoked an international debate about IVF fertility treatment after giving birth to her brother's child using a donated egg.
But first, including the region's latest, today's main news.
Suspects strike a blow against the government's anti-terror laws. And Ian Thorpe stuns Manchester with a new world record.
The ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. Anti-terrorist laws rushed through by the government after September the 11th were dealt a major blow today. Byers gets Blair's support after his public fight back. And Will and Will, stars of the Queen's Jubilee concert.
The ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. The Transport Secretary Stephen Byers came out fighting this afternoon in his battle over the resignation of his Communications Chief Martin Sigsmith.
Government at war as Short accuses Blair of being reckless. And death of a hero as Barry Sheen dies of cancer.
He was a household name that people still think he racist.
The ITV News at 10 with John Suchet.
Good evening. Last night, she called the Prime Minister reckless over Iraq, but tonight, Claire Short is still in her job, still one of Tony Blair's ministers.
Britain terror threat compared to September the 11th. And Rooney makes his debut on a difficult night for England.
The ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Heathrow Airport tonight, the heart of the biggest terrorist operation Britain has ever seen. Unprecedented security for an apparently unprecedented threat. Good evening. That threat was described by one government minister today as similar to the one America faced on September the 11th. First signs of war. Has the attack already begun? Anti-war protests turn angry across Britain.
The ITV News at 9 with Trevor MacDonald in Kuwait and John Suchet in London.
Good evening from Kuwait City, where tonight, 4 hours ahead of the deadline set by President Bush, there are signs that war on Iraq could have already begun.
Good evening, you're watching ITV One Wales.
And Baghdad on the edge as America and Britain close in.
The ITV News at 9 with Trevor MacDonald in Kuwait.
Good evening. We are sad to confirm tonight that one of our correspondents, Terry Lloyd, has been killed while covering the war in Iraq.
All that to come after the news.
Tony Martin free and speaking out for the first time. Thanks for the memories. The world pays tribute to Bob Hope.
I thank you so much.
The ITV News at 10 with John Suchet.
Good evening. For 4 years, Tony Martin has been surrounded by controversy. Today, the day of his release, he's caught up in a new one. Home for Christmas, British hostage held in the jungle is freed. And the medical blunder that cost 2-year-old Lydia her legs.
The ITV News at 10 with John Suchet.
Good evening. Mark Henderson, kidnapped in Colombia 101 days ago, is tonight on his way home for Christmas.
This is ITV1. Now Granada News and the national news with Trevor MacDonald.
Election battle lines are drawn. Letwin and Brown clash over spending. But if their sums do add up, how many jobs in the public service will have to go? Also tonight, Tutu's attack on Blair. The Iraq war was immoral and the PM should apologize. And the dangerous alcohol craze that's about to sweep Britain.
And in the northwest, a mother lays her 3 young daughters to rest. She tried in vain to save the girls from a fire at their home in Lancashire a week ago.
Good evening. A key battleground for the next election was mapped out today. How much of our taxes should go on public services?
That's after the ITV News with Trevor MacDonald.
New blow for Blair tonight. The man who launched his career votes against the terror laws. Lord Irvine is one of the Prime Minister's closest political friends and even introduced him to his wife Cherie. But tonight he joined the rebellion against the new terror laws as the government suffered a heavy defeat. We'll be assessing the impact of the vote. Also tonight,
I feel total disgust that you should think that I'm here as a political pawn.
the Tories turn to people power as they step up their campaign. And Mourinho's anger, why the Chelsea boss is all fired up before tomorrow's vital game.
In the West Country, thanks but no thanks. Devon Seafar Centre rejects charity cash, saying the government must step in.
Good evening. The government suffered a mauling in the House of Lords tonight over its anti-terror laws. 20 Labour Lords voted against the government.
First on ITV1 with Wednesday's latest news, we join Nicholas Owen.
Street by street, the dramatic battle to take Fallujah. The intense fighting has left the Americans occupying most of the rebel city. British forces have been under fire. We have our eyewitness report of attacks on Camp Dogwood. Also tonight, stub it out, the Scots are told. Will the whole UK get a smoking ban? And blue moments have Chelsea knocked Newcastle out of the Carling Cup.
And in the Midlands tonight, a mother's praised her son after he killed the man she says raped her. Martin Bick from Shropshire is facing 3 years in youth custody.
Good evening. Most of Fallujah is tonight occupied, though not controlled by American forces.
Just how many sex offenders are teaching in our classrooms? Ruth Kelly admits she doesn't know. Parents are furious.
We do not want those individuals in our schools putting our children at risk.
The Education Secretary is under growing pressure tonight after admitting several registered sex offenders have been cleared to work in schools. Also tonight, dicing with death, how some people in Turkey are hiding their chickens to beat the cull.
And I'll be explaining why the ram in this poster ran into trouble for making beer too sexy.
And in the northwest, back to the scene of a nightmare. The survivor of Britain's worst cycling accident talks of his devastation.
Good evening. Revealed, the deputy head convicted today for sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl. The government was warned 2 years ago that Nigel Jackson was a danger to children. But no one took any notice. The extraordinary story of yet another teacher free to abuse. Our investigation shows that for months the Department of Education didn't even reply to a letter warning that Jackson should be blacklisted. As pressure mounts on Ruth Kelly, another shocking failure in a system that's meant to protect our children. Also tonight, freezing to death, we report from beyond the snow line where Pakistan's quake victims are dying every day. And saved by the World Cup, what the FA said today about Sven and the fake shake.
And in the northwest, mourning his son, a father's painstaking final farewell for the teenager who died in Britain's worst cycling tragedy.
Good evening. Blair's new offer to Iran: stop supporting terror or face isolation. It comes as the Iranians are blamed for killing British troops in Iraq. So tonight, Blair's challenge to Iran's president: are you a partner or a pariah?
They stop supporting terrorism in Lebanon or Iraq. They abide by, not flout, their international obligations. In that case, a new partnership is possible.
They're international outcasts condemned as sponsors of state terrorism. Now Tony Blair wants to engage the leaders of Iran and Syria in a desperate attempt to resolve the deepening and bloody conflict in Iraq. Also tonight, hard cash for quitting hard drugs, the compensation payments for prisoners who were forced to endure cold turkey. And he's back with a whole new look for the legend that is James Bond.
And in the northwest, Michael Shields tells Granada his move from Bulgaria to a jail in Britain may not go as smoothly as expected.
Good evening.
After the ITV News, it's 10:30.
Tony Blair says he believes America will act to tackle climate change. He tells me it's the most serious threat we face, but the mood is changing across the globe. Tonight, new hope that a climate deal with the world's major polluters is finally on the way.
There is a changing mood around the world. For the first time, I think in America they're prepared to act. And so I'm more optimistic than I was, but we've got to work at it.
We're live in Antarctica, where scientists believe climate change is already happening, and we report on how rising sea levels are already having a dramatic effect thousands of miles away. The first climate change refugees, the islanders forced to leave their homes for good. And homeowners beware, fears of another hike in mortgage rates as inflation hits an 11-year high.
And in the northwest, the man who was told he'd won the Canadian lottery by conmen who took £80,000.
Good evening from Antarctica, the first frontier in the battle against climate change. And in a first for television news, we're broadcasting live from here, surrounded by ice. Back from the political dead, Hillary Clinton's victory against the odds throws the race for the White House wide open.
Let's give America the kind of comeback that New Hampshire has just given me.
The former First Lady is back on track after her surprise win in New Hampshire. So she's neck and neck with Obama tonight in what promises to be a fight to the finish. The two rivals are now preparing for the bigger primary battles that lie ahead. I've been speaking to the man leading the Clinton campaign. Also tonight, feeling the squeeze as M&S struggle, a warning of just how tough it's getting on the high street. And don't play it again, Sam. Allardyce is sacked after just 8 months at Newcastle. Good evening. It certainly is for Hillary Clinton. This time last night, even she thought she'd lost the New Hampshire primary, and with it perhaps her chance of becoming American president.
The man Diana wanted to marry, an exclusive interview.
I know she's not here to defend whatever I say, but whatever I would say is what honestly I believe.
Hasnat Khan has remained silent about his affair with the princess for 10 years. Tonight he speaks to us. As Paul Burrell tells the inquest, he spoke to a priest about a private wedding.
Also on News at 10. Beaten to death in her home tonight, the charity hostel for ex-offenders at the centre of a murder inquiry for the second time. And no more bad behaviour. Fabio Capello tells us England's players must clean up their act.
Good evening. News at 10 is back tonight with an exclusive interview with Hasnat Khan.
Here on ITV1, it's News at 10.
Free within hours, the man convicted of the Lockerbie bombing is set to be flown home to Libya tomorrow.
The idea of compassionate release, whereby he may be free to go home to Libya, to his family, is quite difficult to take if he is indeed a guilty man.
News at 10 understands that the Scottish Government has decided to release Abdul Basit al-Megrahi on compassionate grounds, a decision certain to cause outrage in the United States.
Also on the programme. Terror in the heart of Baghdad. A series of bombs kills more than 90 people. Hundreds more are injured. And the darker side of cricket, as an Australian player is targeted by a betting ring.
Good evening. The man convicted of Britain's worst terrorist atrocity, the Lockerbie bombing, is almost certain to be freed from a Scottish prison within hours.
Coming up after News at 10.
£4 million, the ransom demanded tonight by Somali pirates as their British hostages reveal the strain of their ordeal.
Thank you very much. Please give our love, especially to Paul's father. We tell him we miss him very much.
For the second day running, News at 10 has managed to speak to the Chandlers, this time to Rachel, who broke down as she said she and her husband Paul were bearing up.
Also on the programme, sacked tonight, the government drugs advisor who said ecstasy was less harmful than alcohol. And saving Sophie, cash pours in for the little girl who needs £500,000 for cancer treatment in America.
Good evening. Within the last hour, it's emerged that pirates holding a British couple captive in Somalia have demanded a ransom of more than £4 million. The ultimate sacrifice of a soldier who saved countless lives, killed by a Taliban bomb days before he was due to see his wife and his son.
This is the ITV News at 10 with Mark Austin and Julie Etchingham.
Staff Sergeant Olaf Schmidt spoke to ITV News before leaving for Afghanistan. He died defusing one more bomb before coming home. Also tonight, breeding terror inside the most lawless country on earth and why it could pose the greatest threat to Britain's safety. New arrival, Wayne Rooney leaves hospital tonight after becoming a dad.
Good evening. The widow of a soldier killed by a Taliban bomb paid tribute to the bravery of her husband tonight, but she said the pain of loss is overwhelming.
The cuts they dare not name, the massive black hole in the spending plans of all the main parties.
This is the ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham and Mark Austin.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies says the parties are not coming clean. It says the country should brace itself for the most severe spending cuts in a generation or more, whoever wins the election. Also on the programme.
The teacher accused of attempting to murder one of his pupils and killed by friendly fire. A coroner calls for a review of battlefield procedures that left 3 soldiers dead.
It's opened up all the wounds, having to go through the inquest. For the families, it's been the most traumatic and stressful time in their lives.
Good evening. One of the burning questions of the election campaign was finally answered today, but not by the politicians.
On the ITV News at 10, the full scale of Jimmy Savile's abuse revealed. There were hundreds of victims, but opportunities to stop him were missed.
The government taught him to kill. Now he's using his skills to get revenge. The Specialist is our film in 35 minutes after the ITV News.
Predatory and pervasive, the appalling scale and nature of Savile's sex abuse revealed. But never charged, never prosecuted. He was the monster everyone knew who hid in plain sight.
I think we were all taken in. You could say he groomed a nation.
This is the ITV News at 10 with Alistair Stewart and Natasha Kaplinsky.
The Crown Prosecutor and the police apologise for years of inaction and say it is a watershed. For Savile's victims, the relief of being believed at last. Also on the programme, job shock in manufacturing as Honda sack 800 in the face of falling demand across Europe. And Kate says her first portrait is amazing. Others are less generous.
It's the kind of image, in fact, that you might see in a high street photographer's window.
Good evening. The hideous Jekyll and Hyde nature of Jimmy Savile's life was confirmed today in reports by the police and the NSPCC.
Black magic or something more sinister, Agatha Christie's Marple tomorrow at 8. But now, the ITV News at 10.
The biggest shake-up of pensions in a generation. But the government is accused of a short-term fix with long-term pain for many.
Also tonight, HMV, the latest high street name to call in the administrators. And Britain slides into winter. The big freeze that could last a fortnight brings snow and ice to much of Britain.
This is ITV News at 10 with Mark Austin and Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. The changes to the state pension set out today by the government will hit more people than it will help, according to independent economists.
The paedophile rock star who plumbed new depths of depravity is jailed for 35 years. Ian Watkins committed a string of sex offences against children and babies. Now there are questions over whether he could have been caught sooner.
Everything that I was reading, that people were tweeting, was everything that I've been reporting for 5 years.
Also tonight, the heartbroken mother of the British doctor allegedly murdered in Syria on how she tried to rescue him. And time runs out for Ronnie Biggs. The great train robber dies at 84.
This is ITV News with Julie Etchingham and Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. Paedophile Ian Watkins is tonight at the centre of an international police investigation as he starts a 35-year jail sentence for the abuse of children and babies.
Time now on STV for all the national and international news at 10.
A surge in killing in Israel, the US accuses both sides of terrorism. The dead Jews and Arabs are now counted in double figures. Hamas call it a new intifada.
Also on the programme, Lord Britain's MP accuser apologises for the hurt he caused, but stands by his claims of sex abuse. And we're inside secretive North Korea and witness the blitz mentality deep under the capital.
The other countries will follow our country, I think, in the recent years. So we are masters of the world.
This is ITV News at 10 with Alistair Stewart and Natasha Kaplinsky.
Good evening. The simmering anger of a bloody week in Israel boiled over into deadly violence today with more deaths.
More job losses at Tata Steel beg a string of inevitable questions tonight. Can the industry now be saved? Should it be? And if so, why is the government sitting on its hands? Also on News at 10 tonight. Learn English or go home, says David Cameron. We are home, say the immigrants we've spoken to, but we should have learnt English. And I was made in Dagenham, says Idris Elba, but I could only make it in film and TV by leaving Britain.
Made in Hackney, made in Newham, made in Dagenham, but above all, I was made in my mind.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Once in a while, you do encounter a statistic that does seem to cut straight to the heart of an issue.
The Prime Minister tells us to be prepared for our lives to change dramatically if we want to defeat coronavirus. Britons should avoid the office, pubs, social gatherings, and whole households should now stay at home if one person has symptoms, but schools remain open.
I can't remember anything like it in my lifetime. I don't think there's really been anything like it in peacetime.
As the number of people to die in the UK reaches 55, we will examine this enormous change in policy and the impact it will have on our lives, the economy and the NHS. Also in News at 10 tonight. The son of a coronavirus victim tells us about the heartbreaking reality of what it's like to lose a loved one to the disease sweeping the globe. And in America, President Trump bans gatherings of more than 10 people and closes schools across the entire country.
This is ITV News at 10 with Raghi Omar.
Good evening. The word unprecedented is often overused in describing moments of national life.
Here with all the latest headlines now, it's the ITV News at 10.
Over 50 dead and dozens missing as catastrophic flooding hits Germany. After torrential rain, the sheer force of water swept lives and homes away at horrifying speed, the worst natural disaster to hit the country in decades, ringing alarm bells over climate change. Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg and France have also been hit, and weather forecasters are predicting there is yet more rain on the way. Tonight, Angela Merkel has spoken of her grief for those lost. Also on News at 10 tonight. Welcome to the pingdemic. 500,000 told to self-isolate as COVID numbers surge and businesses count the cost. No lost souls in Kenya. The brilliant new green enterprise turning flip-flops into art.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. Untamed, unchecked and unprecedented floods in Western Germany have claimed dozens of lives. The death toll, which keeps on rising, over 7,000 dead in the Turkey and Syria earthquakes. The desperate search for survivors goes on. In freezing weather and as aftershocks still hit, thousands of families are frantic and there is mounting anger at a lack of help. As international teams scramble to get on the ground, we'll get the latest from the region from Emma and Rachel, where Turkey's president has declared a 3-month state of emergency. And closer to home, a huge effort to help is underway too. Charities and families across the UK are gathering supplies to send, some fearing the worst for their relatives. In other news tonight,
you brazenly raped and sexually assaulted many women, some you barely knew.
36 life sentences for former Met officer David Carrick after 2 decades of rapes and assaults of women.
It's Mullin!
Wrexham's heroics, but is it enough to deliver a Hollywood ending in the FA Cup?
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. Through aftershocks, through tiredness and bone-chilling cold and through terrible grief,